Hello and welcome to another Living Bridges conversation. Today I'm in conversation with Duchscherer, who's an NVC trainer, and he has, for the last close to 20 years, he's been facilitating trainings in nonviolent communication, and for over 50 years now in restorative circles. Duke has worked around the world and across different contexts, from small communities to leading conversations and dialogues with governmental leaders at the United Nations. And we'll be talking to him about his experience in a bit. Thank you so much, Duke, for agreeing to speak to us today.
Yeah, thank you, Ranjita. It's an honor to be here. I really celebrate all that is happening with Living Bridges. So I'm grateful to be here.
Thank you. So can you tell us a little bit about the kind of work that you do?
Well, I obviously do, nonviolent communication trainings and participate in, facilitating those and also working in, 9-day intensives and things like that. That's one part of my work. And then another part that's takes quite a bit of my focus and energy these days is working with communities in conflict, often violent conflict, and helping them to find a way to dialogue together, using some of the NVC skills and the restorative circles skills to, create understanding so that they can find a different way of resolving their conflicts than through various forms of violence.
And what motivated you to bring NVC, restorative circles, and these kinds of processes into? What made you say that, this is what I'm going to be doing?
I'm not sure. It was kind of this, inner pull that I've had, all through my life. I mean, I can remember somebody coming to a class in my 4th grade and showing work that he was doing in, I think it was Guatemala is what I remember. And again, I wouldn't have called it peace work at the time, but I think that's what it was. But that something in me got like, oh, I want to do that, whatever that was that I understood at that time. And just, felt this pull all along. So when I came across, NVC, I immediately recognized something that I had been looking for, but hadn't realized it. And was so surprised by it that I had read Marshall's book. I came across his book, and then I read it a second time because I was like, was it really all that I thought it was? And I got so excited at the time that I literally quit my job and went to the next training that Marshall was offering because I really wanted to learn this because it really spoke to me about how it could support myself and all of us in what I might now call doing in building peace and learning how to live together with more peace and ease and harmony.
I recognize what you say around, I found something that I didn't know I was looking for, because my first experience of NVC, I remember, was this sense of, I really like what's happening here, and I can't put my finger on what exactly it is that's really nourishing for me. And I kept coming back until I was able to articulate what that was about, that sense of deep understanding of myself.
Yes. Yeah, I was similarly, I think when I initially saw it, and I was like, oh, this would be so great for, conflict and all these, peace building and all this kind of stuff. And then I end up spending the first 2 years mostly with myself and kind of getting to know myself through NVC, because I didn't really know myself very well, and I would get angry or upset and not have a clue, like, what was it? When I calmed down 3 days later, what was it that, gosh, that person just said this small thing and I exploded, like, what happened? And I couldn't understand, myself. And so I really resonate with that idea of, first getting to know myself and kind of really knowing how to care for myself and what's important to me and all that kind of things. That's what NVC really helped me, but it was a surprise because that wasn't what I initially thought about coming into it.
I know you've done some projects across the world, around the world. I know you've led dialogues in Nepal and between Israelis and Palestine and in Ukraine. Can you just speak a bit to a couple of projects that you worked on so that those who are watching this video get a sense of where this is being applied?
Sure, sure. Yeah, for the last many years now, my focus has sort of been in sort of two areas around peace building conflict, all in relation to communities in conflict, but sometimes it's communities who are actively currently in conflict. So it's a live conflict that's ongoing and happening, and often has many violent components. And then there's also communities that went through very intense, very violent conflicts. That part of that process has ended, but they're needing to reconcile and heal. And so that's the two sort of basic forms. So for example, facilitated a dialogue in Ukraine with my Ukrainian colleagues there between a Russian-speaking, Russian cultural community living literally 15 kilometers from the war front, and an Ukrainian army battalion that was stationed in that town to sort of protect that town. And a lot of conflict, and a lot of the men from that town were actually on the other side of the war front fighting against that Ukrainian army. So as you can imagine, there was a huge amount of tension there. So that's, one example. Or another example of that kind of live conflict was between herders and farmers in northeastern Nigeria, where Boko Haram was also very active in that region, and helping them to work through, some of the challenges and that they had, there had been in this community that I was particularly working at. This kind of conflict between herders and farmers is happening all over Western Africa, Western Central Africa. And, but this particular community had turned violent the year before, and a few people had been killed. And so they were really wanting to find another way to deal with it, because the herders had come, they're nomadic, so they come and go, and they were coming back in, and it was a time of increasing tension in that community. So that's more live conflict. And then reconciliation, places like you mentioned Nepal, or a couple of years ago, I did some work in Peru around the 20-year, basically civil war that happened there, bringing together, different people who were formerly part of different rebel groups, people who had been, lost everything, lost family members and lost their homes, their land, everything. Some of those people and some other civil societies and social change organizations together for dialogue to try to find some way of reconciling and healing, Or another example, again, a couple of years ago before the pandemic, in Rwanda, bringing together genocide survivors and the people who were just released from prison, who were the ones who had killed their family members, and bringing them together for dialogue, to help, again, because these people who were released from prison were wanting to kind of move back to the communities where they're from. But that was also the place where they had, killed other people. And so there was obviously a lot of tension to try to help find a way to, how can they live together? How can they move forward after all that had happened? Yeah, so those are kind of the two main areas that I seem to be working in. And then supporting, local people to learn the skills to help facilitate these dialogues themselves.
You talked about working in areas where there's live conflict. What does it take to create a sort of a container that allows for authenticity and trust enough to be able to speak and hear each other, especially when there's threat of, there's a present threat of conflict?
Yeah, well, it first takes, a lot of work on the ground to build, trust with the people who are organizing it, you know. So my colleagues on the ground, for example, wherever it might be in Nigeria, Ukraine, to build that trust with them, and that can take some time. But then it's also been surprising to me, because it can both take some time to build that trust, and yet also when people have become desperate enough that they turn to violence to try to meet their needs, they're also really often looking for another way to resolve the conflict than continuing the violence, because they see firsthand how costly it is. You know, sometimes I think when we have a small disagreement with our neighbors and we're like, we won't talk to them for a while, it can be easier to fool ourselves that it doesn't have a cost. It doesn't have a price. I think it does, but it can be easier to kind of not see it. And I think when we get to the level of violence, it's pretty hard not to see it, the huge cost. And so in those moments, often people are really like, if you show them something that they can have some hope, it could be different, that they jump to it. I remember, you know, the Ukraine example for a while. You know, I was having my own stories, like, you know, what is a battalion commander going to want? Like, how they're going to say, like, this is a bunch of garbage, get away from me. You know, I'm not interested in this dialogue, you know, stuff. That's not going to help us at all. And I was shocked, you know, when I actually sat down, you know, my Ukrainian colleagues, I sat down with him to talk, that not only was he interested, that he even started to be thinking. I had a stack of needs. NVC people will be, you know, of needs cards. And I just pulled them out and put them on there. I hadn't mentioned a word about needs. I hadn't said anything. And at one point in our conversation, he reached over and he grabbed the pile and he started flipping through them. And he started putting some off to the side and some just in front of him. And what he was doing was literally looking at the needs that he and his soldiers had around the work they were doing in this community. And I hadn't even mentioned it to him. I hadn't said a word about needs or anything. And he just naturally did it. He started doing it because he recognized, you know, internally how much they were wanting something different, because the relationships with that community were severely strained.
Yeah, and I guess it's about finding resonance with these needs, whether or not you've learned NVC. It's that as human beings, we do see that, well, that's what I want, or that's what I deeply long for.
Yeah, and I think, you know, all of us who work with NVC, we see it every day in ourselves, and you know, those that we might be supporting, that the more we, you know, can hear and listen at that level, the more people start, you know, we start to build a connection, we start to build trust, and that, you know, rich understanding can come from that. And that's same, you know, experience I've had in communities in conflict, that, you know, when you receive them and you hear their pain in the way that NVC enables, that starts to build trust, and they start to have hope. Oh, maybe there is a different way we can do this conflict that doesn't need to end in violence. And I think that's also the pull of, you know, of they, you know, as human beings, we, you know, one of our needs is peace and harmony. You know, so we all are searching for that, even if we have resorted to violence, you know, in the past, in a desperation to take care of those needs. And so it's both not easy, and yet it also, you know, there is that strong pull that communities, if they can trust that there is another way of doing it, they often, you know, jump at it.
You referred to the Ukraine story and said you went in with some stories about how prepared people would be to receive this facilitation. How do you, as a facilitator, care for yourself and the intensity that comes up during conversations or situations like this?
Yeah, certainly the NVC skills are very important, and, you know, built into the restorative circles process is care for the facilitators themselves, because I'm certainly human. I can't speak for other facilitators, but I'm very human, and so I'm definitely going to have, you know, stories and judgments about people. You know, in the Ukraine example, certainly I grew up in Canada where, I was impacted by the Cold War. So I had stories about Russians. And so, I had to really work on those stories to transform them to see, the Russian speaking people in front of me as equal, wonderful human beings that they were and are, or, in Rwanda, for example, I heard stories of how families members were killed that were horrific. And so I needed to use the self-empathy and to receive empathy, the NVC skills, to be able to continue to see the people who did those kind of things as human beings. Again, not to agree with or say, that's great, go ahead, keep doing those kind of things, obviously, but to see the human needs behind, what led them, in their fear and desperation to act and behave in those ways. And so that I could support them equally as, I did, and, the other people who, received a lot of that violence in this case.
I guess it's also about recognizing that as a human being, there's no way I can be impartial in that sense of the word that a lot of people talk about, and about constantly being aware of what's happening within me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in restorative circles, we call it being multi-partial. In other words, I'm partial towards everyone in the sense of wanting to support them to be heard fully and understood in the way that they're hoping to be understood. And that, if I can support that happening, then, then it's much more likely that they're going to find a way forward together. And that starts, as you so rightly mentioned, with me. I need to, be able to support them and see their humanness and the beauty of their needs that they were trying to meet, even if their way of meeting them was pretty horrific or painful.
How does your practice and how does the framework of NVC support you in holding these spaces, both structure-wise and with you skills-wise?
Yeah, I think one of the things I love about, restorative circles and how that was developed, by Dominic Barter and the communities in Brazil, is that it creates a structure where it encourages, it invites, it supports people in really hearing each other, at that empathy level. So throughout the whole 3 phases of the process, empathy is built into it. And the way that it's structured, for example, when the different conflicting groups come together, when someone speaks, they're invited to ask someone in the circle with them to listen to them. And that listening is not just a parroting back word for word, but kind of that deeper meaning, or in NVC, moving us towards empathy, to truly try to hear that other person with empathy. And so it creates a structure where that's built into it. So it's not like I have to, do this without any support. It's built into it. So I love that, because it really supports people who I mean, we all have these skills inside of us. And one of the things that NVC helps is it helps us to really bring that forward and to develop them more fully. And that structure in restorative circles, for example, it supports that happening, so that people can really be heard, because, that's why I'm expressing, that's why it's, I want my pain to be heard. And it really helps people to hear in a way that creates understanding. And so it's built into the structure. And that's, I find very powerful for people to be able to hear, even when they've, been killing each other. Even in that extreme, it can still help people. It can create that support. And it doesn't mean that people aren't, I'm always in awe of people's strength and courage, because I think it does take that to walk towards conflict, and one of the things NVC, helps us to see is that conflict itself isn't scary. It's just the ways that we've learned how to try to handle it. And NVC really teaches us, it can be okay when you have these skills we can get through conflict and kind of like where it takes us, instead of being like, oh my God, what a disaster that was.
I want to move into talking about peace building now. You've been working in this space for a while. What is the role as an individual in peace building? What can I as an individual do to bring more peace into the world?
I'm always reminded of the quote that Margaret Mead, an American anthropologist, has famously said something. I'm paraphrasing, but basically, she had said something about, it's not just that a small group of people can possibly help. It's like that's the only thing that's really changed the world, is when a small group of people come together. So I think we have much more power than we realize. And I think that's one of the things I love about NVC, is when we connect to our own needs, when we connect to others' needs, that's the beginning of knowing that's our power of how we can make life wonderful for somebody else. And one of the things, certainly that I try to do as best I can to myself as an individual is, can I live, that moment by moment, model that. So if someone does or says something I don't enjoy, instead of falling into judging, criticizing, blaming, shaming people, can I really in this moment, connect to my needs that are met, then connect to their needs that, they're expressing or acting upon, and really try to model a different way of, working through difficulties, working through conflict, working to understand another human being. Can I do that myself? Because I think we sometimes minimize how powerful our own modeling is, our own living of our values, and even when we struggle, can we do that in a way that demonstrates, wow, yeah, this is not easy, wow, I really am angry at that person, or I'm hating that person in this moment. Can I be vulnerable about that and also find a way to work through it? So I think, we as individuals who are learning, constantly trying to live NVC, and also, as NVC communities, and that, can we really demonstrate when we have conflict? Can we find a way to work through it, even though it's darn hard and scary? I think that's really, really powerful. I recall there's a thing called a peacemaking pyramid, which has different levels of things that people can do to build peace and make peace. But the bottom level, which is the most important, the fundamental level, and the one all the others are based on, is what the people who created this peacemaking pyramid say, a heart at peace is what they call it. And so it's, can I do my own internal work so that I can be that force for peace out in the world? That's the base of everything. So I think, it really does start with our own work.
Speaking about systems, in NVC, we talk about everyone's needs matter. And often this can look hazy at the level of systems because most of us haven't seen systems where everyone's needs matter. How can NVC help us create those? What can they look like?
Yeah, I think I really resonate with what you said, that, it's almost hard for us to imagine what it looks like because we haven't really ever lived in a system where we care for everybody's needs. It's certainly not, in the cultures I grew up in anyways. I was taught to focus on, my needs and take care of me and, maybe my family, and that's it. And not even knowing that I'm living in bigger systems. And I think it's super important that we look at the systems level. And again, I think the needs can be the basis of that, really recognizing what needs do I bring to a situation, what needs are others around me bringing, and I think NVC helps us to really recognize the interdependence of needs, that I really can't, as we say in NVC, I really can't get my needs met at the cost of your needs, without both of us, leaving needs on the table that don't get met. That it'll have an impact on both of us that we won't enjoy, myself included, even if I'm the one who's getting my needs met at the cost of yours. And so it's important to start to look at how do we organize as human beings. That's what a social system is, as I understand it. How we organize is ongoingly organize as human beings to carry out some tasks, some things like decision making, like sharing resources or dealing with conflict. And so it's so important, I think, that we look at things at that systems level, because for a number of reasons. One is, if we don't consciously choose the systems that we live within, we're going to just keep repeating the ones that we've always had. And if they're already set up in a way that doesn't care for everybody's needs equally, then we're going to just continue that cycle on and on. So we need to consciously start looking at it. Another reason is we don't even know for sure. I think we intuitively grasp what a system that cares for everybody's needs would look like, but we've never, as you said, we've never lived in one. And so we need to start, creating those kinds of systems ourselves. Because another reason I think important to look at systems is because systems sort of, they kind of generate their own behaviors. It's not that me as an individual can't act differently than the system is pushing me towards, but for example, based on hierarchy, and the one above you has the power to say yes or no or whatever. It's not, doesn't mean that someone who has that power can't act collaboratively and bring people in and decide together, but the system makes it very much more difficult to do that than to just say, okay, this is what we're doing, period. And, like it or lump it, leave it if you don't, leave if you don't. The system makes it much easier for me to act and behave in that way than it does to, collaborate. So again, another reason why it's so important that we start thinking about consciously what kind of systems do we have and what do we want, what's working and not working about those, and what would be important, what would be the optimal way we could do that together. That's one of the things that's I still find incredibly challenging about restorative circles work, and yet super valuable, is it invites people around conflict to start thinking about this. How are we working with conflict, in our family, in our neighborhood, our community, our organizations? What does that look like? And what about that is, yeah, it seems like it's helpful. I like this part of how we do conflict. And then what about it is like, oh, that's not working so well. It's not really helpful. And then to start consciously saying, okay, if we were to create our own system of, kind of like our own justice system, how we work with conflict, what would that look like? What would be the elements that, would be important that we'd want to include in that system? And then as we discover those elements, how do we make that happen? And one of the things I love about Dominic's work and the communities in Brazil is that they have done that already. They've spent the years through trial and error, and they came up with a way of doing the system differently than, our normal, for many cultures, retributive justice system based on punishment. And they've done that. So it gives us an example, not that we necessarily want to copy, every exact detail, because it might not work in our culture or our setting, but it's like someone's already invented the wheel. So we might need to make different changes to it, but we don't have to come up with the whole concept of a wheel and figure out how do we build it and do it. We have that already in place. And I think this is, one of the beauties of NVC and restorative circles is it gives us some of those skills to be able to consciously say, well, what would that system look like? And how do we build it? We've got some ideas already just from the way we've learned how relationships happen.
And you said our systems kind of make it hard for us to go sort of resist them and do the opposite of what they're trying to get us to do. I'm guessing the corollary is true as well from what you're sharing about restorative circles. It's that when our systems promote collaboration, when they create a space where everyone's needs are considered, it's much easier to do that than the opposite.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it can be a positive cycle forward as well as a negative cycle. So yeah, if we learn how to create systems, you know, in the sort of circles case around justice, around conflict differently, and experience what it's like to live in there, I think it'll also make it easier for us to create other kinds of systems that are, again, based on those values of holding care for everyone's needs, you know, like decision-making, governance systems, you know, sharing resources. Certainly that's an enormous problem on this planet of how resources are shared in quotation marks. And, you know, we certainly need to adjust our economic systems based on different values than certainly what they are now.
Right now, we're in a time where there seems to be so much polarization across the globe over different topics. Social, political, health has become such a huge polarizing topic in the last couple of years.
Yes.
In a time when things are so polarized, what can we as individuals do to be bridges?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the first for me, I mean, I can catch myself seeing a news item and be like, how can you do that? You know, that's ridiculous. That's a stupid idea. Or, you know, what are you thinking? And so, yeah, so first it can be starting again, just working on myself and trying to understand people who are making different health choices than I'm making, you know, or seeing the, you know, the politics different than I'm seeing them. You know, can I do that internal work and, you know, both hear my own needs that are maybe not met by certain people's choices, and then trying to connect to the needs that they're meeting by making those choices so I can see them as human beings. That for me is always the first place to start. And then, you know, in small ways or big ways, I think they're all important. How can we start to reach out? You know, maybe we have a neighbor that, you know, has made a different vaccination choice than us, or has voted differently than us in the last election. Can we reach out in some way and build bridges with that person or that family, you know, by, you know, really listening to what's important to them, their needs, you know, and then finding a way maybe to also share what's of our concern if it's different than, you know, from them. I think that's so important. Even those small little steps can be huge. And then certainly if we're motivated or have the possibility of, you know, doing that in, you know, a work environment or our neighborhood, or, you know, in some other ways that we have the ability to, you know, reach across to that other group, whatever it might be, you know, people who, you know, see the environment as endangered, people who don't, whatever the story might be, can we reach across to those other people and start building some connections, some bridges, you know. I think any way we can do that is super, super valuable. And that's one of the reasons why, as much as I love doing training, I also want to do the hands-on work, because I think there's so much need for it out there. To be able to do both is so very important.
And I guess a part of this is also about remembering that reaching out or listening to the other person isn't necessarily that I'm surrendering my own belief or that I'm giving in to their point of view.
Yes, I think that many people, when you invite them to also hear the needs of someone else, it can sound as if, or feel as if, okay, so if I listen to them, I've certainly heard people say this back, if I listen to them, then that means they're right and I'm wrong. And it's, again, so hard. We're so embedded in, if we're as talking about systems, we're so embedded in a system that looks at, you know, who's right and who's wrong, you know, who's good and who's bad, who deserves what, based on that, you know, judgment of right and wrong, good and bad. And it can be really challenging to step out of that whole system way of thinking. You know, it's based on a mental model of right and wrong, good and bad. And that can be really, really challenging for us to step out of that that way of thinking. And that's, where NVC can be so supportive, recognizing that even if I'm listening to them, it doesn't mean I'm agreeing to them, but I am trying to understand what's deeper behind those choices that's motivating them, that we share, which, in NVC we call needs. Those are the things that we share that, oh yeah, at that level, for your health and well-being, you're making this vaccination choice or that vaccine. Wow, yeah, I can understand that, even if it's a different choice than I'm making. Wow, yeah, I really want my health and well-being. I want the health and well-being of those around me. Absolutely. So I can certainly, start to see where the common ground is. And then how can we care for that health and well-being together? So turning people who seem to be against us actually to work together with us. And the needs are the way forward to that, I think.
Are there moments from, the last 20 years of your work that stay with you powerfully, or stories that you think about, that kind of give you the inspiration to keep going?
Yeah, a number. It's one of the things I love about the live working, with live conflict or reconciliation work, is that you hear about, or people's at their worst, but then you can also see them, at a place that is truly miraculous. For example, I remember one woman in Peru during the 20 years of violence there. She lost her husband, her son, her brother, and an uncle to the rebel group, killing them. And then she lost her land and had to literally flee and abandon her house and flee with her kids, the remaining children, to safety, to capital city. And so she wanted to be a part of a dialogue where there were people from the actual rebel group who killed her family. And she was terrified. And one of the things that actually terrified her was her own rage, that there was still, after, the conflict had been finished for 20 years, but still that rage and that huge pain lived in her. And she was so scared that when I first sat down and talked with her, she was really torn about whether she wanted to even participate. And, so we left it completely open. I just listened to her pain and, the empathy NVC way and everything. And then when we started the dialogue, she decided to show up, but she said, I'm not gonna speak. And, she stayed silent for the whole first day. And, everyone else spoke and said things, and she heard and she stayed and she listened. And then on the second day, she decided to speak. And so she spoke, but for literally it was like a minute and a half, 2 minutes, just said a couple words. Someone said them back, and that was it. And then as we were closing the final day, the second of 3 days, I kind of opened it, is there anyone else who wants to say anything before we close? And to my surprise, her hand sort of slowly went up, like she was like, okay, I think I can do this. And she, in the process of restorative circles, when you speak, you choose someone to listen to her. The first time she just chose another person that she knew. This time, not only did she choose to speak, but she chose someone from the former rebel group, who was a former member of the rebel group, to listen to her. And so to see her courage to be able to start to say all of her pain and her rage and to let it out, it was awe-inspiring. And equally awe-inspiring was this man, because I don't know, he may have directly killed her family. I don't know, but he certainly was part of the rebel group who did all those things. And to see his courage and the strength it took for him to hear what she was saying and then to say it back to her, in the best way he could, in empathy, and to see that exchange go back and forth, and he was able to do it. And then, at the end of that, he needed to walk away and kind of be by himself to try to absorb everything. And then the next day, he was able to share his story and all the good reasons of, quote unquote, the needs behind why he did what he did and what happened to him. And she stayed there and was able to listen to that. And so for me, at the end of the dialogue, she walked over to this man and they embraced, and it still brings tears to my eyes when I remember it, because it was such a powerful moment. And I love the picture of the whole group at the end, because he's sitting on the ground and she's sitting directly right behind him. And so the power of the story moves me so much I can't even remember what your question was. But just for me, that power of and the courage and strength that when people are willing to walk towards their conflicts, as Dominic would say, and really, in this way that NVC supports us to hear each other and really understand the humanness behind each other, then, miracles are possible. Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite sayings, it says that the holiest place on earth is where an ancient hatred has become a present love. And for me, that's, what can happen in these moments when we create a space where people can truly understand each other, that in the way that NVC supports.
And that's really amazing, because that's, I guess, like you said, that requires so much courage to be able to reach out to someone who's actively caused you harm or whose family you've harmed, to be willing
Right.
to share your inner experience with them, and to, just the willingness to connect, to reach out human to human, and then the magic that happens after that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm always in awe when I see that happen, because I don't know if I could do it myself, and it's inspiring. And yeah, to see people being willing, and yet I've seen it time and time again where people somehow find the courage and find the strength, and it's just, if we can create that space, that environment where it's, people can step into it, then as you said, that magic is much more likely to happen. It can be possible where people's pain truly gets transformed, and we can, heal and find a way to live together, obviously differently than we have in the past, but in a way that hopefully cares more fully for everyone.
Thank you for sharing that story. And as we bring our conversation to a close, anything you'd like to share?
No, just I guess just gratitude to all of you at Living Bridges who are, sharing this work, spreading this work, living this work yourselves in so many powerful ways. I'm really grateful, because more of us that are doing it, all in our own different ways, I think we're going to move step by step towards, systems and societies where we better care for everybody's needs, that dream and that vision. So yeah, thank you all for all the work you're doing.
Thank you, and thank you for your support. You've offered workshops with us in the past year, and we hope to host you again for 2022. And thank you for having this conversation with us. So much learning in this for me, and I'm guessing for anyone who's watching this video right now.
Well, it's been an honor, and I'm really grateful. So thank you. And yeah, I'm excited to learn and work together with all of you.
And that brings us to the end of this conversation. This was a Living Bridges conversation, a series of conversations focusing on the relevance of empathy, compassion, and the principles of nonviolence and social change. We'll be bringing you more of these. This conversation is a part of our fundraiser. We're raising funds to keep the Living Bridges program going in 2022, and you can find the information in the description. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon.
Yay, support.